The members of this network are connected to perhaps a few others. But even before I asked anybody, I could tell that there would be some connections in this network, because there are more people here than there are birthdays. Let's say, for example, there are 500 people here, and maybe 500 in Venice. Let's say 1,000 people here tonight, either in person or on the net. There are only 365 days in the year. So it is impossible that this network is empty of edges. There must be, even before I ask, at least 2 people who are connected. In fact, we can say more than that. I'm an isolated node, apparently. So let's cross my name off, cross my birthday off. I could name another day. April the 1st? Anybody here born on April the 1st? Oh, there is one? Let's pretend there isn't. That could be another isolated node. So cross that day off the list. And this could continue for quite some time, but not forever. Because eventually, after 364 days, if we were so unlucky, we would have crossed every day of the year out except one. And all the remaining people would have to share a common birthday. So because there are more people than birthdays, there must be links in this network. In fact, since there are, say, 500 people here, there must be at least 100 people here who share birthdays with other people in the hall. We don't know who they are, we don't know who they are matched with, but they're certainly there. And this is one of the themes we're going to have tonight, that in unstructured networks, there are inevitably structures inside them. And this is what we'll be looking at as we move on. But the birthday network is very special. It's not a typical social network, because it consists of cliques. This is a French word. I'll have to explain. Suppose, for instance, there were 5 people born on New Year's Day. So here they are, somewhere in the hall. And these are all connected to one another by their common birthday. Everyone is connected to everyone else. That's a 5 clique, I call it. And the birthday network just consists of cliques, very tight-knit groups, separated from each other. For it's impossible for any of these people to be connected to any others, because they're the ones whose birthday is New Year's Day. Everybody else has a different birthday. So the birthday network just consists of these isolated cliques. So in some ways, that's not a typical social network. To get a typical social network, let's go from a birthday network to a birthday party. So imagine we're at a birthday party, which has, let us say, 100 people here. That has a very different character, because here you'll see chains of friendship or chains of acquaintanceship. For instance, you may go to the party, you'll know some people and not others. Here is me at the party. I meet 2 of my friends. Okay. Here they are. And they don't know each other, but I will introduce them. And now we form a little triangle of acquaintance, a 3 clique. And when we start talking to each other, we always find surprising links to other people, perhaps at the party, perhaps elsewhere, perhaps ancestors, perhaps events. And this never ceases to surprise people. And it shouldn't, because mathematicians have explored this, as have others. And I'll now go to my next slide. Very mysterious. I brought this along because it's the most English thing I've ever seen in my life. It's the opening credits to a television series about the affair between King Edward VIII and the American woman, Mrs. Wallace Simpson. And it's a little 30-second opening. Now, certainly you can watch it. Whoops, if it comes up. But I want you to listen to the song that's sung. Of course, it's in English. It's in perfect cut glass English. And we'll translate it in a moment anyway. But you'll see my point. Let's let it roll.
I've danced with a man who's danced with a girl who's danced with the Prince of Wales. It was simply grand, he said, talking band, and she said, delightful, sir. Glory, glory, hallelujah, I'm the luckiest of females. For I've danced with a man who's danced with a girl who's danced with the Prince of Wales.
I've danced with a man who's danced with a girl who's danced with the Prince of Wales. That was enough to send the girl singing the song into raptures. And this 1927 song is the oldest reference I can find to this idea that we're all linked by surprisingly short chains. And this is what we see in any social network, whether it be at a party or the World Wide Web. It's a common phenomenon. And it's not difficult to explain in common sense terms. What characterizes social networks is the presence of what we call hubs. And a hub is a person, or perhaps an organization, such as the Pope or a bank, which has many thousands, perhaps millions of connections to other people. And so nearly everybody will be linked directly to a hub, or more than one hub. And so we get small chains of connection between almost any two people, often via these hubs. For example, if you were to take a young girl in Nigeria and a working man in America, they could not possibly be connected, you would think. But if you look at the idea of hubs, it's easy to imagine how they could be linked. For example, in the following way. The young girl may have met, say, a Catholic bishop. The bishop will have met the Pope. The Pope has met the United States President, who has perhaps met a prominent businessman who knows the boss of our American worker. That is very feasible. And it gives a link of length 6 between our young girl in Nigeria and our American gentleman. And there could be many more chains between just these two people, who are in different continents, worlds apart, you might say. But they are linked. But now I want to emphasize something slightly different. This is true. It is something I just heard in the news today. There was a play by John Gear called 6 Degrees of Separation, which emphasized the fact that everyone is joined to everybody else by short chains. And this has entered the popular imagination. And people inevitably look for short chains from themselves to important people, to celebrities, to royalty, to rich people. and often they can be found. But equally, of course, although you may not look for them, there will be chains from you to everybody else, including people you don't like, people you never want to meet. There will also be short chains from you to criminals, to terrorists. And of course, this is important in that we now know that, at least in the case of the United States and Britain, they're what's the word for them? Their spies are busy keeping tabs on these short chains. So they identify people who they say are very risky people, perhaps terrorists, and they monitor the chains of their emails, their telephone conversations. And we should be aware that there will be short chains from these people to many, many thousands of people, perhaps us here tonight. And these people are entirely innocent and do not know these people in any way. But there will be these chains there. And of course, the NSA will be aware of this. But it works in both directions. We're all connected to each other, for better or for worse. But let me move back to the party. So I want to discuss another aspect of parties. My next slide. That can stay there for a moment. At a party, you'll typically know some of the people there, and some of the people there you won't. But one thing we can say for certain, what is inevitable, is that at any party, there will be two people with exactly the same number of friends at the party. And how do we know that? Well, how could it be otherwise? Imagine you have 100 people at your birthday party. How many friends can a person have at that party? Well, the most a person could have is 99. The hostess of the party may know everybody there, that she's invited. What's the least number of friends you could have at the party? The least number is 0. It sounds sad, but it could be true. There could be a gate crasher, somebody who nobody's ever seen before, who just turns up. So we have 100 people, and we have 100 different possible friend numbers. All the numbers from 0 up to 99. They're all possible. So we might think it may be possible that everybody has a different friend number. But there is one final twist which renders this impossible, because just say that was the case. Then there is a person there with 99 friends, and she knows everyone, including the gatecrasher, including the person who thinks they have no friends. And because friendship, or at least acquaintanceship, is a two-way street, it goes in both directions, that is impossible. You can't have somebody who's friends with everybody and someone who's friends with nobody at the same time. And so there must be duplication. There must be two people at that party with exactly the same number of acquaintances. And this is true at every party that ever there was, or ever will be, or ever could be. It's inevitable. And this is what mathematicians search for, is things which are absolutely unavoidable, even in very unstructured arrangements. And another thing which can't be avoided are cliques. You may say, well, that is wrong, because I could imagine 100 people in a room, and nobody there has ever met anybody there before. No cliques, not even a two-clique. That is true. But what must happen is that there will be a clique of, let's say, 3 people who all know each other, or a clique of 3 people who all don't know each other, mutual friends or mutual strangers. At least it's true when you have enough people. When you have 6. Not when you have 5. we can have 5 people at a dinner party. 9 people's way. Here they are. And everybody knows the 2 people they're sitting next to, but not the other 2 people. And in that case, there are no 3 people there who know one another, and there's no 3 people there that are mutual strangers either. If you take any 3 of those people, 2 of them will know each other, but there'll be 2 that won't. In fact, we can draw the network of strangers. A knows B and E, but doesn't know C. C doesn't know E. E doesn't know B. B doesn't know D. D doesn't know A. The blue network is the network of strangers. It looks quite sinister. It's a pentagram. It's actually the same network. If I draw the network of strangers in a slightly different way, A doesn't know C. C doesn't know E. E doesn't know B. And, oh, I missed somebody. A, C, E, B. B doesn't know D. And D doesn't know A. I'll draw it that way. You can see it's actually the same network in disguise. Neither of them have a triangle with 5. But. That's how you say but. But, as soon as we have 6, things are different. Oh, I can see 6. Here we go. Suppose we have 6 people at the party. One of these cliques must turn up. Just focus on one of the people, A. Ooh. Lost my battery. Oh, here he is. Now, there are 5 other people at the party at least. So, there must be 3 people that A knows, or 3 people that A doesn't know. Let's just take the first case, because the argument is the same in both cases. So suppose A knows these 3 people. Now look at this triangle of people. Or either they've never met each other before, and then we have a triangle of strangers, which is what we want, or maybe 2 of them have. Perhaps B and C know each other, in which case we have a triangle, a 3 clique of mutual acquaintances. But as soon as you have 6 people, this has to happen. You either have a triangle of strangers, or a triangle of friendship, or perhaps both, in the network. So you might say, well, so what? Just a feature of having 6 people. But when a mathematician sees something like that, they get very interested indeed. Because they will immediately ask, they've been trained properly, with 6 people, I have a 3 clique, a triangle. How many people do I have to have a 4 clique? Any guesses? Well, maybe there's no answer. Maybe, no matter how many people I have, I can cunningly arrange the relationships of acquaintanceship in such a way that there's no 4 clique of friends and no 4 clique of strangers. But that's not true. And this man proved it wasn't true. Ramsey, he proved that if you have 18 people at your party, there will be a 4 clique. What does a 4 clique look like? A 4 clique would be 4 people, and they all know each other. Each person knows every other person in the clique. If you have 18 people, You have a for clique of friends or a for clique of strangers. Can't be avoided. And not just 4, and not just 5. He showed that if you choose any number at all, k, if you have a party which is large enough, the bigger the k, the bigger the party, you must have a clique of k people who all know each other or all who are mutual strangers. It can't be avoided. This object cannot be avoided in very large collections. Ramsey was a very brilliant mathematician and economist. He came from a brilliant family. All of them were devout atheists, except the youngest brother, who was a devout Christian, and to prove the point, he became Archbishop of Canterbury, despite them all. But Frank Ramsey died very young. He's 27, but not before founding a whole branch of mathematics, which is not just about parties. This idea that however unstructured your network, you will find very structured objects inside. And this is used to prove very deep theorems in mathematics. One I'll mention is a theorem of Bruijn, an Austrian mathematician. I'll explain what he said. Say if I have a disk, and I rotate this disk, say, through 90 degrees, about the center. When I do that, every point moves, except the center. Not remarkable. But what he proved was that if you take a disk, or indeed any ordinary shape, and map it onto itself in a continuous way, without tearing it, there is always at least one point which remains absolutely fixed. And this is a beautiful theorem. I'm sure Giuseppe Peano would have loved this theorem. In fact, he would have known that theorem. In 1926, Bruijn proved this. And I know Peano, like Leonhard Euler, like Paul Erdős, were men that did mathematics their entire life, right up until the day they died. And it's very much the kind of thing he would have appreciated. I was first introduced to Peano's work when I was 19. His brilliant space-filling curve, which is an amazing object. But the reason why I mention this theorem is because of this seed of inevitability. When you see a result like that, even though it looks like to have nothing to do with networks, there's a network argument which proves it. And that is the case here. I can't go into details, but it's a lemma called Sperner's lemma, which is simply about triangles. It's very peculiar. It says that if you take a triangle and partition it in a very particular way, a certain pattern will inevitably appear within that triangle. And by using this result, you can prove this result of Bruijn, which is not about networks, which is about physical objects. But the reason why I mention it is because of the sneaky way, the extraordinary way it's proved. Did Sperner find the pattern in the triangle? No. He doesn't know how to find the pattern. He introduced a peculiar way of counting the number of patterns, and he showed that the number of patterns he was after was an odd number. Who cares if it's an odd number? Because it's an odd number, it's at least one. And so there must be a pattern. So he proved that it existed by proving that the number of these objects is odd. And this is a theme often used in mathematics. These are called parity arguments. And I'm going to show you a very simple one not Sperner's lemma, but a lemma about a problem about a teacher and her class. A teacher has 35 pupils, and they're arranged in 5 rows of 7, like this. And she's a little bit bored, and so are the children. So she tells the children, everybody's going to shift desk to a new desk. But to make it easy, everybody should move just one place to the left or the right or up or down to somebody, a neighboring desk, to someone next to them. And then she says, you sort it out among yourselves. Go on, do it. Very well-meaning, but she set her class an impossible task. It's impossible. It's an impossible game of musical chairs. Do we have musical chairs in Italian? The children aren't being silly. Why is it impossible? Well, in our imagination, we color the desks 2 different colors, blue and red, starting with blue. So since we start with blue, there'll be 18 blue desks and 17 red desks. That's obvious. However, every blue desk is next to a red desk. Okay? Every blue desk is next to a red desk. So a blue child has to swap with a red child. And similarly, a red child has to swap with the blue child. That's her rules. Can you see the problem? There's one more blue than red. So there'll always be one child, a blue child, who misses out, no matter what they do. They can run around any way they like, and it's impossible. Because of the inevitabilities in the network. And another key inevitability in any network is called the handshaking lemma. And that's why I've used this Pink Floyd album cover. Imagine you're at the party again. And you shake hands with everybody else at the party. And if everybody counts the number of times they've shaken hands, and we add all those numbers up, we'll get an even number. Because every time there's a handshake, 2 hands are shaken. So if we add up all these numbers, we get twice the number of handshakes. So we call the number of edges connected to a node, we call it its degree. And so in this network, all the nodes have got degree 4. And here all the nodes have got degree 3. So what the handshaking lemma tells you is that when you add up all those numbers, you always get an even number. And there's a particular consequence of this. And that is that the number of even nodes, the number of odd nodes in the network is always itself an even number. It's a very pretty network. Just an example. And you see that every node here has degree 3, connected to 3 edges. So when you add up all the degrees, you'll get 3 times 20, you get 60. So there are 20 odd nodes. How do we know this always happens? This is the trickiest part of the talk. Suppose I was wrong. and we had a a network with an odd number of odd nodes. I want to convince you this can't happen. Well, add up the degrees of all the nodes in this strange network. The nodes of even degree, when I add those up, I'll be adding up even numbers, which gives me an even number, E. And now the odd nodes. We're pretending there's an odd number of odd nodes. Now when I add up an odd number of odd numbers, I get an odd number. For example, 3 plus 5 plus 7 is an odd number. Don't know what number it is, but it must be odd, because there's 3 odd numbers there. 3 and 5 is 8, 8 and 7, 15, odd number. So the contribution from the odd nodes would be an odd number. So the total of the degrees would be an even number plus an odd number, and that's an odd number. And that's what the handshaking lemma says is impossible. It's always even, because there's 2 hands in a handshake. So you can't have an odd number of odd numbers. How much time have I got?
10-50 minutes. 10-5 minutes.
So why is this important? It's very important when you see American football. This is a picture of the game between San Francisco and Jacksonville. They have 2 games now each year at Wembley in England. San Francisco is my team. We used to live in California, and the San Francisco man's going in for a touchdown. Good for him. But American football had a different history. We're used to, in Italy, in England, we have 3 or 4 divisions, all linearly ordered. Very simple. Some teams are promoted, some teams are relegated. Very sensible. American football is not organized like that. For historical reasons, it's split into 2 conferences, the American Conference and the National Conference. The conferences consist of little divisions of 4 or 5 teams, and each team has to play the other teams in its division, home and away, but also play another 8 games against other teams in its conference and against a few teams in the rival conference. So how are we going to do that? Well, the initial proclamation by the governing body was impossible. And the reason why was because the rules that they tried to impose had a network, a would-be network, that had an odd number of odd nodes in it. In other words, it was impossible to satisfy the constraints that they were trying to impose. Even though they were quite simple, everybody agreed on them, they were very reasonable, but mathematicians explained to them there was no point getting their computer buffs to check all possible schedules, because in no circumstances could these constraints be satisfied. And it was all down to the handshaking lemma. When something is mathematically impossible, it truly is impossible and can't be ignored. I want to go back to the beginning now. Who discovered networks? It's almost like asking who discovered drawing. Drawing networks is something that comes very naturally as soon as we start thinking about it. But the earliest problem I could find was this one. It's a chess problem. It's a difficult problem, and it's a 9th century Sanskrit problem. The question is, can you get a knight to move around every square of a chessboard without treading on one twice? As you probably know, the move of a knight in chess is an L shape. He moves 2 in one direction and 1 at right angles. And the answer is, well, you'll see your answer. So let's just watch. And you see he's not repeating a square. And he covers all the squares in due course. And that is what's called a Hamiltonian path. Because this is a network. The squares are the nodes of the network. And 2 nodes are connected if a knight can hop between them in one move. This famous graph has not just a Hamiltonian path, but a Hamiltonian cycle. Because if you follow the numbers, you'll see that you start at 1, you cover every node of the network, end up at 20, and then can pass back to 1. So there's actually a cycle which takes you through every node of the network. And 2 of the outstanding problems in mathematics is whether a network has such a cycle, and if it hasn't, how we can pass through all the nodes as cheaply as possible. This is called the traveling salesman problem, and the corresponding problem for the edges is called the Chinese postman problem. The latter is quite easy to solve and uses the fact that the odd nodes of a network come in pairs because of the handshaking lemma to quickly find a solution. Whereas the so-called traveling salesman problem is not just a cute problem about saving money for traveling salesmen. It's actually one of the deepest and most fundamental problems in mathematics. Can this problem be solved in a relatively easy way that can be made precise? It can certainly be solved, but can it be solved in a reasonable amount of time? But the oldest problem I could find is the maze of the Minotaur. Problems about mazes are, of course, network problems. And this so-called maze of the Minotaur is in the ruins of Pompeii. There's an example of it on the floor of Chartres Cathedral in France. It's in cave drawings in Peru. And even Aboriginal Australians have drawn this exact maze many thousands of years ago. And it looks so complicated. Why should this keep happening? It's because, although I can't show you tonight, there's a very simple rule which allows you to draw this particular network. And it's obviously been discovered and rediscovered over time. In the case of the maze of the Minotaur, Dionysius was freed from the maze by the skill of his lover Ariadne, who placed a thread that allowed him to escape the labyrinth. And Ariadne was obviously a good mathematician, because the theory of mazes in network theory exploits this idea of an Ariadne thread time and again. But the first modern problem in networks is that of the Königsberg bridges, brought to the attention of Leonhard Euler in the middle of the 18th century. You must have seen this. Can you cross all the bridges without crossing one twice? So I'll try. Here I go. Here we go. I'll go this way, that way, that way. And now I want to cross this one, but I can't get there. Silly me. But it's not silly. What Euler showed was, not only was that this impossible, but he found a rule that allowed you to solve any problem of this kind. And it's all based on odd and even nodes. This example really represents the whole theory, simple as it is. There are 4 places you can be, 4 nodes. The 2 banks of the river, 2 banks of the river, and the 2 islands. And they're connected by these bridges. This gives us a different network from ones we've seen before, in that there are multiple edges between some nodes, but there are still a network. And he spotted a simple reason why this is impossible. Imagine that I did traverse all these bridges once. I would start somewhere, I would end somewhere, but there would be 2 nodes which were not at the beginning of the walk and not at the end of the walk. So pick any one you like that's in the middle of the walk. Every time you reach the node, you use a bridge, and every time you leave it, you use another bridge. So on each visit, you use up 2 bridges. So if we were to cross all the bridges once, and once only, there must be some nodes that are even, that have an even number of bridges connected to them. But look again, it's not the case. All the nodes are odd. Degree 3, degree 3, degree 3, degree 5. No even nodes, so it can't be done. It is absolutely impossible. But I do want to show you this network, because it's the opposite of a maze. It looks very complicated. It's called the Bruijn network. But it's wonderful, a wonderful network for people who are lost. You can build these networks of any size. This has 16 nodes. You can make one with 32 or 64. All the nodes are labeled by the 16 binary words of length 4 using 0 and 1. It's a directed network. Some of these are all one-way streets. You can go in one direction and not back again. Let's say your house is 1001. And you're lost, you're here. You just follow the path with the name of your house. 1001, and you're home, as if by magic. Let's start here. 1001. You're home. What if you're home already? You still won't get lost, even though you're trying. 1001, you're back home. Works for every house. You cannot get lost. And it has a remarkable property that you can take the labels of all the edges in a cycle, and you get a way of designing washing machine dials. The circular label here comes from following the edges of that diagram you just saw. It's a washing machine dial. And at the top here, there's 4 switches. At the moment, everything is off. 0 means off. 1 means on. Now, as you turn the dial, every possible string of 4 symbols comes up exactly once. So every possible of the 16 settings occurs. And that's how they make real washing machine dials. It's all based on these de Bruijn strings. But finally, about 5 minutes? I want to show you this. You've all heard of Sudoku. A few years ago, I invented a circular version of this game. And here's a manifestation of it. This is an ordinary Sudoku puzzle. And I will end with this in a minute, just telling you a little story. I thought this was such a good idea, and it was so popular in Britain. I thought, how could I make some money out of this? I'll be very brief. An ordinary Sudoku square is what's called a Latin square, which means each of the symbols 1 to 9 occurs in every row and every column. And using some network theory, which I won't go into, I invented a circular version of it. It's similar but different. There are 10 symbols, the numerals 0 through to 9. And to solve this puzzle, for instance, you have to fill it in. And each of the rings has to have each of the 10 symbols. And each neighboring pair of triangles here also has to have each of the 10 symbols. And of course, these overlap. So that pair there has to have all the symbols. But equally, so does that pair there. And in fact, what is going on here is an interacting pair of Latin squares. And a piece of network theory that I exploited was the fact that if you start to construct a Latin square by rows, you can never get stuck. And the reason why this is true is quite remarkable, because the proof uses, it's not my proof, it's a standard piece of theory. The proof uses the fact that there's a method to maximize the amount of oil that flows through a network of pipes. And if you interpret these problems implicit in this puzzle in that way, it shows you the result I needed to make sure that these puzzles actually exist and will work out properly. And it was quite an extraordinary experience, because myself and my youngest daughter wrote a book with these puzzles in. It was published in America. And a company, without asking me or anybody else, made I have a prop, made this physical version of it. And they were nice enough to send me one. And so, on a personal level, this is the most extraordinary network experience I ever had, because it took almost exactly 12 months from the time I was trying to solve these problems in my head. It became a book. It went to America. People I'd never met and still don't know took it, made it into a physical object, and sent what was in my head back to me as a solid little game that children could play. So I think that proves that even for a mathematician, networks always have surprises. And I think that's where I'll finish for now. Thank you very much for listening to me.